The sun in the backland starts to rise and the temperature already exceeds 30 degrees. The smell of freshly laid gravel mixes with the red dust stirred up by the trucks. Compactors vibrate over the ground. Rails are positioned with millimetric precision, while technicians check levels with surveying stations. In the middle of the dry landscape of the Northeast, the Transnordestina Railway stops being a promise and becomes concrete infrastructure. After almost 2 decades between stoppages, audits, and financial restructurings, the railway has reached 79% physical completion. In the priority section, there are 1,206 kilometers under the responsibility of the concessionaire, with all lots contracted and simultaneous work fronts in operation. But what do these numbers really mean? Which sections are already consolidated, and what still needs to be done? Stay with us for the next few minutes and check out an updated overview of the Transnordestina in the priority section. The Transnordestina was designed to connect the productive interior to the exporting coast. The route starts from Eliseu Martins, crosses Pernambuco, goes through Ceará, and continues to the port of Pechem. Originally, the project planned for 1,753 kilometers up to the port of Suape, forming a logistics corridor with 2 maritime accesses. After the contractual restructuring in 2022, the current scope became focused on approximately 1,200 kilometers. Under the management of Transnordestina Logistica, SA, the railway was reorganized into 3 phases, prioritizing the most economically viable route in the short and medium term. Designed to operate with mixed gauge and heavy load standards, the estimated capacity is up to 30 million tons per year. This means connecting agricultural and industrial hubs directly to the port, reducing logistical distances and dependence on highways. But the projected length does not mean the infrastructure is complete. After almost 20 years since the official launch, what is the real stage of this railway in the territory? To understand the current stage, it's necessary to review the origin of the project. The Transnordestina was officially launched in 2006 with the goal of reducing the logistics cost in the Northeast. At that time, the transportation of grains, minerals, and fuels depended mostly on highways, increasing freight costs and reducing international competitiveness. The project planned for 1,753 kilometers of track, connecting the Piauí Savannah to the ports of Pechem and Suape. However, the administration faced technical and financial obstacles. In 2016, only 52% of the railway was completed. The initial budget of RR5 billion exceeded RR billion over the years. In 2017, the Federal Court of Accounts ordered the suspension of federal transfers due to inconsistencies between the physical schedule and financial execution. Starting in 2019, an institutional restructuring began. In 2022, the Constitution returned the Salgueiro-Suape section, focusing efforts on the route up to the port of Pechem. The contract was amended with the National Land Transport Agency, setting goals, deadlines, and regulatory milestones. It is worth noting that the financing began to include resources from the Northeast Development Fund, the Northeast Investment Fund, FINOR, and structured contributions from the new Growth Acceleration Program. With this, the project entered the contract stability phase, the Constitution. From this point on, the analysis stops being historical and becomes technical. What has actually been carried out on the ground? Currently, out of about 1,200 kilometers under the responsibility of Transnordestina Logistica SA, 79% have already been completed in the Ceará section. In addition, all 19 lots of Phase 1 are formally contracted. This point is relevant because it ends a historical cycle of sections without contractual coverage. It's worth noting that the last 97 kilometers between Baturité and Aracoiaba received a service order at the end of 2025. The Constitution. This stage, the entire corridor up to the port of Pechem, is now officially under continuous implementation. According to the government of Ceará, there are 10 simultaneous work fronts distributed along the route. In these work fronts, more than 4,000 workers are engaged in activities ranging from earthworks to the installation of railway superstructure. So far, the investment made exceeds our Brazilian, real $2.9 billion. According to the guidelines agreed with the National Transport Agency, the completion of Phase 1 is scheduled between 2026 and 2027. Next, Phase 2 plans expansion until 2029, reaching Eliseu Martins again. At the same time, the Salgueiro Suape section remains under its own planning at the federal level, which in the future may restore the originally conceived logistics design. In the technical field, however, the numbers need to be translated into completed work. Every railway starts with what almost no one sees, earthworks. That's where the so-called grade is defined, meaning the slopes and curves that will determine the effort required by the trains along the route. Deep cuts and extensive embankments are carried out with constant topographic control. The goal is to maintain slopes compatible with trains of up to 120 cars. Poorly designed slopes affect fuel consumption, traction effort, and mechanical wear. In practice, when dealing with soils with lower bearing capacity, additional solutions are adopted. In these situations, the soil can be replaced, reinforced with stronger material, and compacted with strict control. To ensure that the soil can support the weight of the trains, technicians measure the density of the ground, control the moisture, and apply the so-called support index, California, a test that indicates whether this base is actually resistant to the surface. Only after this validation does the construction of the permanent track begin. This phase begins with the installation of the substrate, a layer that serves as a structural transition between the treated soil and the ballast, as well as protecting the base against contamination by fine particles. Next, the ballast is applied, made of high-strength graded gravel. Here, the goal is to distribute dynamic loads, absorb impacts, and ensure efficient drainage along the platform. On this base, concrete sleepers are placed, which support the rails and distribute the weight of the trains. They are designed to support up to 32 tons per axle, a standard compatible with heavy freight railways. Soon after, the rails are welded into long continuous bars. This solution reduces mechanical joints, minimizes vibrations, and decreases the need for corrective maintenance. Since Transnordestina operates with mixed gauge, the track laying requires even greater geometric precision. In certain segments, a supplementary rail is necessary, increasing future compatibility with other railway networks and allowing strategic integration with the national system. While the permanent way progresses, the special engineering works continue. At the same time, bridges and viaducts ensure the crossing of federal highways, watercourses, and areas of seasonal drainage. It's important to point out that some of these structures exceed an impressive 300 meters in length. Far beyond their size, another important aspect is that, depending on the geotechnical conditions identified in the surveys, either board piles or continuous flight auger piles are used. This technical choice is determined by the soil's load-bearing capacity and the expected structural behavior. At the same time, the rail yards are being implemented. These yards are not just auxiliary areas, they are essential operational structures for crossing, technical parking, and assembling long trains. Another critical element is drainage. Although the semi-arid region experiences prolonged periods of drought, the rainfall events are intense and concentrated. For this reason, culverts, drains, reinforced concrete galleries, and dissipation channels were designed based on specific hydrological studies. In addition, slope protection with appropriate coverings reduces the risk of erosion. Topographic inspections, laboratory tests, and continuous verification of the road geometry ensure compliance with contractual specifications. Thus, when stating that the railway has reached 79% physical completion, it is not just about the kilometers built. It is about the technical consolidation of earthworks, structures, permanent way, and drainage systems. In other words, it is the structural foundation of a railway corridor designed to operate at a heavy industrial standard and to definitively connect the productive interior to the exporting coast. To grasp the scale of the Transnordestina, it's necessary to convert kilometers into tangible references. With about 1,200 kilometers, the railway is roughly equivalent to the distance between Fortaleza and Brasilia. If laid end to end, the tracks would cover more than 1,600 soccer fields lined up. In terms of capacity, the projected 30 million tons per year is close to the performance of the Carajás Railway. Although with a diversified cargo profile, each train, with 120 wagons, will be able to transport about 8,000 tons. This is equivalent to replacing approximately 300 bulk trucks per train. When operating at full capacity, the railway will be able to take nearly 750,000 truck trips off the highways per year. This replacement will reduce congestion, pavement wear, and emissions. In fact, the future connection with the North-South Railway expands the national logistics reach, integrating the Northeast into a continuous railway corridor. On an international scale, the Transnordestina approaches the heavy haul corridor model used in Australia. The investment, estimated at 15.7 billion reeds, places the Transnordestina among the largest recent railway projects in the country. To concretely illustrate this scale, this amount would be enough to purchase approximately 209,000 brand new economy cars, considering an average price of 75,000 reais per vehicle. In other words, this is a volume of resources equivalent to a fleet capable of occupying hundreds of kilometers of highways. But in this case, it is being directed to build a permanent railway corridor with the capacity to transport millions of tons per year over decades. The scale of the Transnordestina should be analyzed not only by its territorial extension, but by the structural transformation it brings to the regional logistics matrix. As Phase 1 moves toward completion expected between 2026 and 2027, the axis between Eliseu Martins and the Port of Pechem should begin a gradual cargo operation, marking the transition from civil works to the operational phase. Next, Phase 2, projected for the end of this decade, will expand this territorial reach, consolidating the corridor as an effective alternative to long-distance road transport. At the same time, the resumption of the Salgueiro Suape section strengthens Pernambuco's logistics integration, rebalances the original design of the project, and expands the possibilities for port access. In addition, the future connection with the North-South Railway is likely to insert the Northeast into a continuous national railway corridor, integrating it with the main cargo flows in the country. With this consolidated structure, the expectation is to reduce the region's agricultural logistics costs by up to 30%. At the same time, the presence of the railway is likely to stimulate the expansion of intermodal terminals, warehouses, and new industrial hubs along the route, amplifying the multiplier effect of the infrastructure on the regional economy. The Transnordestina has reached a decisive stage. With 79% physical completion, all lots contracted, and structured financing, the project has moved forward. Beyond the phase of uncertainty, there are still kilometers to complete. But unlike in the past, there is a schedule, resources, and active work fronts. If the current pace is maintained, the Northeast will have one of the main railway corridors in the country. Thank you for watching this video until the end. What do you think about this phase and the progress of the Transnordestina? Is it too slow? Should it have been completed already, or is it at the right pace? And what do you expect when this railway is finished? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'll stop here. A big hug and see you in the next video.